The howling Montana wind nearly tore the cabin door from its hinges as Vera Buchanan struggled to push it closed, her slender frame no match for the ferocity of the approaching blizzard. With one final desperate shove, she managed to secure the latch, pressing her back against the rough-hewn wood as she caught her breath, knowing all too well that her isolated homestead might not survive the night. Montana Territory, 1878. Vera wiped her frost-bitten hands on her worn apron and rushed to reinforce the windows with the few blankets she could spare. 6 months alone on this God-forsaken patch of land had taught her harsh lessons about winter survival, but nothing had prepared her for a storm of this magnitude so early in the season. The cabin walls groaned under the relentless assault, and Vera's heart sank as she watched a hairline crack appear in the corner beam, a death sentence for anyone caught in these temperatures without proper shelter. She had spent every waking hour since her husband's passing trying to maintain the homestead, but some tasks required strength she simply didn't possess. A sharp crack followed by splintering would send her scrambling across the room. The north wall was beginning to buckle. Clutching her husband's rifle, Vera contemplated her options: stay and likely freeze to death when the cabin inevitably collapsed, or brave the storm and pray she could reach the nearest neighbor 5 miles away. The decision was made for her when a thunderous pounding rattled the door. Vera raised the rifle, hands trembling. "Who's there?" she called, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Madam, I'm seeking shelter from the storm." A deep voice responded, nearly drowned out by the howling wind. "I can see your cabin's in trouble. Please let me help before it's too late." Desperation overrode caution. Vera unlatched the door, immediately stepping back with the rifle still aimed. The wind nearly knocked her over as the door burst open, admitting a swirl of snow and a massive figure who pushed the door closed behind him with surprising ease. The stranger stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders dusted with snow, a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Name's Ethan Ellis, madam. I was heading to Copper Creek when the storm hit." His eyes flicked to the rifle, then to the buckling wall. "I reckon that wall won't hold much longer without help." Vera maintained her aim. "How do I know you're not here to rob me, or worse?" A particularly violent gust rocked the cabin, sending a shower of dirt and snow through the widening cracks. "Madam, you can keep that rifle on me all night if it makes you feel safer," Ethan said calmly, "but right now we need to brace that wall or neither of us will see morning." Something in his steady gaze, perhaps the complete absence of fear, despite having a gun pointed at his chest, convinced Vera to lower the rifle. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Ethan removed his coat, revealing powerful arms and a work-worn shirt. "First, we need to move your table against that corner, then I'll need whatever lumber you have." For the next hour, they worked in tandem. Vera was impressed by Ethan's efficiency and knowledge. He fashioned makeshift braces from the wood she had stockpiled for winter, explaining each step as he worked. When they ran out of prepared lumber, he asked permission to dismantle her unused chicken coop. "The chickens died last month," Vera explained, trying not to recall how she'd cried when the last one succumbed to illness. "I couldn't keep them healthy on my own." Ethan nodded without judgment, his expression softening momentarily. "Loss is hard out here. Animals, people. The land takes its due." As the night progressed, the storm intensified. The cabin walls shook with wind, but Ethan held them steady with his back, quite literally at one point, bracing a critical support beam with his body while Vera hammered reinforcements into place. By midnight, the worst of the structural damage had been temporarily addressed. The cabin was frigid, but at least it would remain standing. Vera stoked the fire as Ethan stamped snow from his boots. "You've saved my life, Mr. Ellis," she said, offering him coffee. "I'm Vera Buchanan. This was my husband's homestead. He passed last spring." Ethan accepted the cup with a nod. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Buchanan. It's not easy surviving out here, especially alone. He took a sip, his eyes appraising the modest cabin. Your husband built this place? Yes. James had big dreams for this valley. He chose this spot because of the stream nearby. Vera's voice caught, the same stream that took him when it flooded. Ethan's expression remained respectful but pragmatic. A cabin this close to water is risky, convenient in summer, dangerous come spring thaw. I realize that now, Vera replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. James was many things, but a skilled builder wasn't one of them. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. No offense meant, Mrs. Buchanan. Most folks out here learn by trial and error. Some errors are just costlier than others. The wind howled outside, and Vera wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Will you tell me what brings you to these parts, Mr. Ellis? Copper Creek isn't exactly a destination. Ethan's expression became guarded. Work, mainly. I'm a farrier by trade, but I handle most anything that needs doing. Been moving around since the war. The war's been over 13 years, Vera observed. Some men never really leave it behind, Ethan replied simply, and something in his tone discouraged further questions. They fell into silence, the crackling fire and howling wind the only sounds. Eventually, Vera offered him the small pallet by the hearth while she retreated to her bed in the corner, the rifle still within reach. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Vera. She watched through half-closed eyes as Ethan checked the reinforcements one last time before settling on the pallet. His movements were deliberate and efficient, like a man accustomed to making do with minimal comfort. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a blinding white landscape and eerie silence. Vera woke to the smell of coffee and found Ethan already up, tending the fire. Storm's broken, he said by way of greeting, but we've got 4 feet of snow outside that door. Vera moved to the window, dismayed by the sight. She was effectively trapped and now with a stranger. The thought should have terrified her, but oddly it didn't. I need to check the livestock, she said, reaching for her coat. Ethan nodded. I'll dig us a path. Those animals will need water that hasn't frozen over. They spent the morning clearing snow and tending to Vera's remaining animals, 2 milk cows, a mule, and 3 pigs. Ethan worked tirelessly, showing both strength and gentle handling with the nervous animals. By afternoon, he had repaired the sagging barn roof and reinforced its walls against future storms. You don't have to do all this, Vera said, watching him split wood with powerful, practiced swings. Ethan paused, wiping sweat despite the cold. Madam, I'm not one to leave a job half-finished. Your homestead needs more than temporary fixes to survive winter. I can't pay you, Vera admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. James left debts and what little we had went to creditors. Ethan resumed chopping. I'm not asking for payment. Just a place by your fire until the trail's clear. That evening, as they shared a simple stew, Vera found herself studying Ethan more closely. His face was weathered but handsome, with lines that spoke of both hardship and laughter. A scar ran along his jaw, disappearing into his beard, and his hands bore the calluses of a lifetime of manual labor. You mentioned the war, Vera said cautiously. Did you fight? Ethan nodded, his expression unchanged. Union cavalry, enlisted at 18, fought until Appomattox. My brother fought too. He didn't come home. Many didn't. Ethan's tone was respectful but final, closing the subject. The next morning, Vera woke to find Ethan examining the cabin's foundation with a critical eye. She watched from the doorway as he paced the perimeter, occasionally kneeling to inspect something. What's the verdict? She called. Ethan straightened, dusting snow from his knees. Your cabin's built on shifting soil. Come spring thaw, you'll have bigger problems than that north wall. Vera's heart sank. Can it be fixed? Not easily, not cheaply. Ethan's honesty was blunt but not unkind. This land's beautiful, Mrs. Buchanan, but this particular spot wasn't the wisest choice for building. So I should just abandon everything my husband worked for. Anger flared unexpectedly. Just give up and go where? Back east to be a burden on relatives who didn't approve of my marriage in the first place. Ethan's expression remained calm. I didn't suggest giving up, but sometimes holding on means making hard choices. Easy for a drifter to say, Vera snapped, immediately regretting her words when she saw something flicker in Ethan's eyes, not anger, but something deeper, like an old wound reopened. I'll check your smokehouse roof, he said after a moment, walking away. Vera felt ashamed of her outburst. That evening she prepared a better meal than usual: rabbit stew with the last of her preserved vegetables, and cornbread baked in the cast-iron skillet. I'm sorry for what I said, she told Ethan as they ate. It was ungrateful, especially after everything you've done. Ethan shook his head. No apology needed, Mrs. Buchanan. This land doesn't make life easy for anyone, least of all a woman alone. Vera, she said softly, please call me Vera. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Vera, then. The blizzard had dropped so much snow that the trails remained impassable for days. Ethan continued working from dawn till dusk, making repairs Vera had been unable to address alone. Each evening, they would share a meal, their conversations gradually becoming less guarded. Vera learned that Ethan had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. The war had taken him west, and afterward he'd never felt the pull to return east. He'd worked as everything from a ranch hand to a silver miner, learning various trades along the way. What about you? He asked one evening. How did a woman who speaks like she's had schooling end up in Montana territory? Vera smiled ruefully. I was a teacher's assistant in Springfield, Illinois. James was passing through, selling farm equipment. He spoke so beautifully about the land out here, the freedom, the possibility. Her smile faded. My parents were horrified when we eloped. My father was a banker who expected me to marry accordingly. And do you regret it, coming west? Vera considered the question seriously. I regret our unpreparedness. I regret James's stubborn refusal to admit when he was wrong. She looked around the small cabin. But no, I don't regret the choice itself. There's something about this land that gets into your blood. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. That it does. On the fifth day, Vera woke to find Ethan already gone, his bedroll neatly packed. Panic seized her momentarily until she spotted him through the window, returning from the direction of the creek with a string of trout. Creek's starting to thaw, he announced, holding up his catch proudly. Thought we could use something fresh. That night, as they savored the fish, Vera realized something had shifted between them. There was an ease to their interaction, a comfort that had developed imperceptibly over their days together. Trail to town should be passable tomorrow, Ethan said, breaking a comfortable silence. I should be able to move on. The statement, though expected, hit Vera unexpectedly hard. Oh, yes, I suppose you should. Ethan studied her face, his expression unreadable in the firelight. Unless, Vera prompted when he didn't continue. Your homestead needs more work than I can finish in a few days, he said carefully. If you're agreeable, I could stay on a while longer, help you get things properly situated before spring. Hope fluttered in Vera's chest. I told you I can't pay you. I'm not asking for money, Ethan replied. But I could use steady meals and a roof while I work. Come spring, you'd have a property that might actually turn a profit. And then you'd move on, Vera stated, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. Something changed in Ethan's expression, a softening around the eyes, a hint of vulnerability. That would depend, he said quietly. On what? On whether there's reason to stay. The words hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Vera felt her cheeks warm, and she busied herself with clearing their plates. I would appreciate the help, she finally said, not meeting his eyes. If you're certain you don't mind. In the days that followed, they settled into a routine. Ethan would rise before dawn, tending to the heaviest chores before Vera awoke. They would share a simple breakfast, then work separately or together as needed throughout the day. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Ethan made a trip to Copper Creek, returning with supplies and information. Towns buzzing about new silver deposits found north of here, he told Vera. Prospectors are already staking claims. Is that something you're interested in? Vera asked, trying to sound casual. Prospecting. Ethan shook his head. I've seen what mining camps do to men and to the land. I prefer work that builds something lasting. His gaze met hers, and Vera felt a flutter in her chest that she hadn't experienced since her courting days with James, and perhaps not even then. As February turned to March, the worst of winter began to ease. The snow melted enough to reveal patches of earth, and the days grew incrementally longer. Ethan had rebuilt much of the cabin's north wall, using techniques that would withstand future storms. He'd also constructed a proper drainage system around the foundation to direct the spring runoff away from the structure. One evening, as they walked the property assessing what remained to be done before planting season, Vera found the courage to ask a question that had been lingering. Ethan, why did you really stop that night? During the blizzard, most travelers would have passed by. Ethan was silent for several steps. I saw smoke from your chimney, but it was blowing all wrong, like the cabin had gaps letting the storm in. I've seen what happens to people who try to weather these storms in failing shelters. He paused. And I've been alone enough to know how it feels when help doesn't come. The simple honesty of his answer touched Vera deeply. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. Ethan's fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring, and they continued their walk in silence. That night, something shifted between them again. As Ethan stoked the fire before retiring to his bedroll, Vera watched him from her small table where she was mending his shirt, she realized with a start. Ethan, she said softly, it's been almost 2 months. He turned, his expression questioning. 2 months since the blizzard, she clarified. Since you stayed. Ethan nodded, waiting for her to continue. I keep wondering when you'll decide it's time to move on, Vera admitted, setting aside her mending. Each morning I half expect to find you gone. Ethan crossed to her slowly, as if approaching a startled deer. He knelt before her chair, his eyes level with hers. Vera, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. I haven't stayed out of obligation or pity. I've stayed because, for the first time in years, I've found somewhere that feels. He searched for the word. Right. Vera's heart hammered in her chest. And what happens when everything is repaired, when there's no more work to be done? There's always work on a homestead, Ethan replied with a small smile, then more seriously. But that's not why I'd stay. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I'd stay for the woman who faces every hardship with courage, who works from sunrise to sunset without complaint, who makes this cabin feel like something I've been searching for since the war ended. Tears pricked at Vera's eyes. I was married less than 2 years ago, she whispered. Is it wrong that I feel this way so soon? Time measures differently out here, Ethan said. Days can feel like years and years like moments. What matters is what's true now. And what is true now? Vera asked, barely audible. Ethan's thumb traced circles on her palm. That I care for you more than I thought possible. That the thought of leaving brings more pain than I'm willing to bear. That I want to build something here with you if you'll have me. Vera's free hand moved to his face, fingers tracing the scar along his jaw. I thought I was imagining it, she confessed. These feelings. Their first kiss was tentative, questioning, but the second held all the certainty they both needed. When they finally parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. We can take this slowly, he promised. I'm not going anywhere. Spring arrived in earnest with April, bringing mud season and the challenges of new growth. Ethan and Vera worked side by side to prepare the soil for planting, their partnership deepening with each passing day. They still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, honoring Vera's need for time, but their evenings were filled with increasingly intimate conversations and tender moments by the fire. Word of their arrangement had reached Copper Creek, bringing occasional disapproving glances when they visited town together. Vera found she cared less than she might have expected. Mrs. Holloway at the general store asked if we were married, she told Ethan as they rode home one afternoon. She didn't approve of my answer. Ethan's expression was thoughtful rather than embarrassed. Does that bother you, what people think? Vera considered the question. It should, I suppose. A proper widow wouldn't have a man staying in her home. But I find I'm more concerned with survival than propriety these days. Is that all it is? Ethan asked quietly. Survival? Vera reined her horse to a stop, turning to face him fully. No, she said with sudden certainty. It's much more than that. That night, as they sat on the newly built porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Ethan took Vera's hand. I've been thinking about what you said about Mrs. Holloway's question, he began. And I realized I haven't been entirely fair to you. Vera turned to him, questioning. I've asked to stay, to build a life here, but I haven't made my intentions clear enough. Ethan shifted to face her directly. Vera Buchanan, I love you, not just for your strength or your kindness, but for the way you've shown me what home can feel like again. I want to stay not as your hired hand or your friend, but as your husband if you'll have me. Tears spilled down Vera's cheeks. Are you certain? She whispered. I have nothing to offer but this struggling homestead and myself. Ethan's smile was gentle as he wiped away her tears. That's everything I want. Their wedding took place in May, a small affair at the church in Copper Creek. Vera wore her best dress, freshly dyed blue for the occasion, and carried wildflowers Ethan had gathered that morning. The townspeople, initially skeptical of their relationship, had gradually warmed to Ethan's steady presence and obvious devotion to Vera. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony, his words about building foundations on solid ground seeming particularly appropriate given all the work they'd done on the homestead. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was both tender and promising. Their wedding night was a revelation for both of them. Vera, whose brief marriage to James had been more dutiful than passionate, discovered depths of feeling she hadn't known possible. Ethan's tenderness and patience transformed intimacy from obligation into joy. I never knew it could be like this, she whispered in the darkness, her head resting on his chest. Ethan's arms tightened around her. Nor did I, he admitted. It's different when there's love. Summer brought both bounty and challenges. Their crops grew well thanks to the irrigation system Ethan had designed, and Vera's vegetable garden yielded more than she'd ever managed alone. They acquired more chickens and a pair of goats, slowly rebuilding the farm's productivity. But summer also brought threats. A mountain lion killed one of their calves, and drought threatened the creek that supplied their water. Through each challenge they worked together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. On a sweltering July evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying a rare moment of leisure, Ethan broached a subject they discussed only in passing. I've been thinking about relocating the cabin, he said carefully. Not immediately, but before winter returns. Vera wasn't surprised. They'd both known the cabin's location was problematic, too close to the flood-prone creek and on unstable soil. Still, the thought of abandoning James's work completely gave her pause. Where would we build? She asked. Ethan pointed to the gentle rise about 200 yards from their current position. That knoll drains well, gets good sun, and is high enough to avoid any flooding. The soil's more stable, too. It would be a massive undertaking, Vera observed. We'd salvage what we could from this cabin, Ethan explained. And I've been setting aside lumber. We could do it in stages, build the new place while still living here until it's ready. Vera was silent, considering. It's just a thought, Ethan added, clearly sensing her hesitation. This is your homestead, your decision. Vera took his hand. No, she corrected gently, it's our homestead now, and you're right, this cabin will always be fighting the land. Maybe it's time to work with it instead. The decision made, they began preparations immediately. Ethan drafted plans for a more substantial home, incorporating lessons learned from the existing cabin's failings. By August, the foundation was laid and the framework began to take shape on the knoll. Each evening, they would walk to the construction site together, discussing modifications and improvements. Ethan valued Vera's practical input, adjusting his designs to incorporate her suggestions for the kitchen layout and storage spaces. "It's going to be beautiful," Vera said one evening as the setting sun cast long shadows through the skeleton of their future home. "Stronger than the old cabin could ever be. Built right this time," Ethan agreed, his arm around her waist, "on solid ground." The words held meaning beyond the physical structure, and they both knew it. Their relationship, unlike Vera's first marriage, was built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, a foundation far stronger than the one James had hastily established. September brought the harvest and news that changed everything. Vera had suspected for several weeks but waited until she was certain before telling Ethan. One evening, as they worked together preserving vegetables for winter, she finally found the right moment. "Ethan," she began, her hand stilling on the canning jar she was filling, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the carrots he was slicing, his expression immediately concerned. "Is something wrong?" "No," Vera smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to her abdomen. "Something is very right. We're going to have a baby come spring." The knife clattered to the table as Ethan stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then he was on his feet, gathering her in his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." Tears shimmered in his eyes, the first Vera had ever seen there. He dropped to his knees before her, his hand spreading reverently across her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your mama and papa are building you a fine home." The news accelerated their timeline for completing the new cabin. Ethan worked from dawn until dusk, sometimes by lantern light, determined to have the structure weathertight before winter set in. Neighbors from surrounding homesteads, hearing of their situation, came to help with the raising of the roof and walls, a community effort that touched Vera deeply. By November, the new cabin was habitable enough to move in, though many finishing touches remained for the winter months. It was larger than the old place, with 2 proper bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and windows positioned to capture both light and views of the mountains. The day they officially moved in, Ethan carried Vera across the threshold despite her laughing protests about her increasing weight. "This is our true beginning," he declared, setting her gently on her feet in their new home. Everything before was just preparation. That night, as they lay in their new bedroom with the sound of wind outside no longer a threat, but merely nature's music, Vera felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible when she'd struggled alone during that blizzard nearly a year earlier. "You ever think about that first night?" she asked Ethan, her head on his shoulder. "When the cabin walls shook with wind and you held them steady with your back," Ethan's fingers traced patterns on her arm. "I think about how close I came to passing by," he admitted. "I almost didn't stop. What made you decide?" He was silent for a moment. "I saw smoke from your chimney being torn away by the wind. It reminded me of something my father used to say, that you can judge a man's character by whether he'll stop to help when there's nothing in it for him. I didn't want to be the kind of man who'd ride past." Vera pressed closer to him. "I'm glad you're not that man. Meeting you changed everything for me, Vera," Ethan said softly. "I'd been drifting so long I'd forgotten what it meant to belong somewhere, to someone." Winter came, but this time Vera faced it without fear. The new cabin stood strong against the Montana storms, its walls secure, its hearth warm. As snow blanketed the valley, Ethan and Vera spent the short days making furniture for the baby's room and planning for spring planting. In January, they celebrated their first Christmas together with simple gifts and a small tree Ethan had cut from their land. Vera gave him a new leather-bound journal for drafting his building ideas, while he presented her with a rocking chair he'd crafted in secret over the previous weeks. "For when our little one arrives," he explained, helping her settle into it by the fire. "Every mother needs a proper place to rock her baby." February marked 1 year since Ethan had first stayed on at the homestead, They celebrated quietly, reminiscing about how far they'd come in 12 months. "Last February, I was still sleeping by your hearth," Ethan recalled, his hand resting on Vera's now prominent belly. "Afraid to hope you might feel for me what I was already feeling for you." Vera covered his hand with hers. "And I was trying to convince myself that my feelings were merely gratitude." "When did you know it was more?" Ethan asked. Vera smiled at the memory. "When you fixed the chicken coop, even though we had no chickens yet, you said it was planning for better days ahead." "That's when I knew you weren't just passing through." As March turned the landscape muddy once more, Vera's time grew near. Ethan arranged for the midwife from Copper Creek to stay with them as the delivery approached, unwilling to take chances with his wife and child's well-being. Mrs. Peterson, a stern but kind woman who had delivered most of the county's children, arrived with her bags of herbs and instruments, settling into their spare room with the efficiency of one accustomed to such arrangements. "You've built a fine home, Mr. Ellis," she commented after inspecting the cabin. "Proper ventilation, good light for the birthing room, most men don't consider such things." "Ethan thinks of everything," Vera said proudly, wincing slightly as the baby shifted within her. The labor began 3 days later, during a gentle spring rain that seemed to herald new beginnings. Ethan paced outside the bedroom door, banished by Mrs. Peterson but unwilling to go any further from Vera's side. After 8 hours that felt like an eternity, the midwife finally beckoned him inside. There, propped against pillows, sat an exhausted but radiant Vera, holding a small bundle wrapped in the quilt they'd made together over the winter. "Come meet your son," she said, her voice weary but joyful. Ethan approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the bed's edge. When Vera placed the tiny boy in his arms, his hands so large and work-roughened cradled the infant with innate gentleness. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered, using the name they'd chosen together, Samuel, after Ethan's father, with James as a middle name to honor Vera's first husband's memory. The baby's unfocused eyes seemed to find his father's face, and Ethan's heart expanded with a love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "He's perfect," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "He has your chin," Vera observed, reaching to stroke the baby's cheek. "And hopefully your steady nature." Mrs. Peterson left them 2 days later, satisfied that mother and child were thriving. Spring unfurled across their land, bringing new growth that mirrored the new life in their home. Ethan completed the final touches on the cabin while caring for Vera and helping with Samuel. By summer, they had established a rhythm that accommodated both the baby and the demands of the homestead. Vera would work in the garden with Samuel sleeping nearby in a cradle Ethan had crafted, while Ethan tended the livestock and fields. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset with their son between them, marveling at how completely their lives had transformed in just over a year. "I had a letter from my sister yesterday," Vera told Ethan one such evening in July. "She's finally forgiven me for eloping with James. She wants to visit next summer to meet her nephew." "Your family is always welcome here," Ethan said sincerely. "This home is big enough for visitors now." Vera leaned against his shoulder. "When I think of how close I came to giving up after James died, how I almost left before that blizzard hit." "But you didn't," Ethan reminded her. "You stayed and fought for this place. That's the woman I fell in love with, the one who doesn't surrender, even when the odds seem impossible." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the homestead flourished under their combined care. Ethan's carpentry skills became known throughout the region, bringing occasional commissions for furniture and cabin renovations that supplemented their farm income. Vera started a small school in their home during winter months, teaching the children from neighboring homesteads who couldn't make the journey to Copper Creek's schoolhouse. Their second child, a daughter named Elizabeth, arrived 2 years after Samuel, completing their family circle. The little girl had Vera's determined spirit and Ethan's quiet strength, a combination that both delighted and occasionally challenged her parents. 5 years after that fateful blizzard, the Ellis homestead stood as testimony to what could be built from near disaster. The original cabin had been repurposed as a workshop for Ethan's growing carpentry business, while their home on the knoll had expanded to accommodate their family and Vera's school. On the anniversary of the storm, they made a tradition of telling the children the story of how their parents met, how the cabin walls shook with wind, and their father held them steady with his back. "That's what love does," Ethan would explain to wide-eyed Samuel and Elizabeth. "It holds things steady when the world is shaking. And it builds something stronger in its place," Vera would add, her hand finding Ethan's across the table. 10 years into their marriage, as they stood together watching their children play in the meadow below their home, Ethan wrapped his arms around Vera from behind, resting his chin on her head. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Letting a snow-covered stranger into your cabin that night?" Vera turned in his embrace, her face lined now with a decade of Montana weather and motherhood, but her eyes still bright with the same courage that had first captured his heart. "Not for a single moment," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Some storms bring exactly what you need, even if you don't know it at the time." Ethan smiled against her lips. "And some cabins, no matter how shaky, shelter exactly who you're meant to find." Behind them, their home stood solid against the Montana sky, no longer fighting the land but working in harmony with it. Before them stretched the future they had built together, one difficult day at a time, with love as their foundation and perseverance as their framework. And when storms came, as they inevitably did, they weathered them together, two souls who had learned that sometimes saving someone else's walls means finding your own shelter in the process.